their directives? Was it actually giving them free will?
That Thragar stuff is interesting on its own, but was it free will, or was it just freedom from the Titan's edicts? And does that distinction even matter? Actually, does anyone on Azeroth have free will to begin with? Because when we look at past events, sometimes it looks like it, but other times, when you really think about it, it gets a little complicated. Okay, maybe that's just the wrong approach. In order to explore this further, we need to be on the same page regarding what free will is and what it is not. I know, you're probably thinking about the jailer, but hear me out. Let's start with a question. Did you choose your main character? I'm just going to assume the answer was yes. Your main character informs so much of your experience with the game. It's the lens through which you view the game's story, and it can be hard to truly invest in the game if you aren't vibing with the avatar that you're experiencing it through.
Warlock, your class will be the first to be cannibalized for abilities if a new class is added. True. Everyone wants you in the group for utility, and you can get away with not doing good damage. Mage, you'll always have to have a meta spec to play. True. Everyone wants you in their group for utility, but you're expected to do good damage. True. You'll probably get really good at math somehow. Paladin, de facto main character of the entire game. True. You will win every 1v1. Never have to learn mechanics because you can just pop immunity and stand in them. Fucking true, dude. Demon Hunter, no one will ever respect you no matter how complex your rotation gets. True. The class fantasy will grab you by the brainstem and never let go. Nothing similar exists in any other setting. Yeah, I mean, kind of based.
So it's important that this choice is an independent decision that comes from
Mechanics
you as an
cars.
individual without any outside force pressuring you to go one way instead of another. Now, unfortunately, the game's framework puts some restraints in place that narrow the range of decisions you are able to make. Your first thoughts might be of something like faction restrictions. Maybe you wanted to play Alliance, but all of your friends went Horde. But what about all of the other influences from your life? Maybe you have an interest in another fantasy setting that pushed you towards one option, or maybe you just care more about numbers than class fantasy. And all of that peels back to another layer of preceding variables, which all led to you having those friends, those interests, and those values to begin with.
Right. It's
So
very
let me
complex.
ask you again, did you choose your main character, or did all of those preceding variables make that choice for you?
I would say, yeah, that's a tough one, dude. Because why did I make my Warlock? Like, why did I make a Rogue? It was really because of all the history that I had in other games. Like, Stealth Archer type of shit in Oblivion. Daggers and Assassination stuff. Dark Brotherhood. Thieves Guild. I was always really into that stuff more than, like, the Warriors Guild and all that stuff. But I made my Warlock because it seemed cool. Because it was very good in Mists of Pandaria. Like, maybe the best it's ever been. And at that point, I really didn't have an appreciation for the Burning Legion. That really wasn't part of it yet. But I could make the same argument for... I can make the opposite argument for Paladin, where I did pick Paladin for a specific reason. Not that I didn't pick Warlock for specific reasons, but the Paladin is more driven by a shift in ideals, an association of the class with some of my favorite characters, the recognition that it could very well be tied to Sargeras and his crusade, right? It's kind of like when I start talking about like the fact that I happen to name myself Pyromancer and go by that name on the internet. And now have a Legion tattoo. But did I still choose all of those things? Yes. But what he's kind of posing here is the philosophical kind of question of like, did you really choose them? Or did your experiences, your memories, and things like that, did that choose it? Like, are you consciously making a decision that is otherwise completely like unbiased? Or was there something that pre-existed that, like, affected your decision, right? So I think I understand the distinguishment that he's trying to make.
This roughly embodies the concept at the opposite end of the spectrum
Distinguishment? Is that a word? Anyway.
from free will, called causal determinism, where free will is your capacity to choose any course of action at any moment. Causal determinism is the idea that everything, from natural phenomena to social interactions, is causally inevitable. The same way that you can predict objects falling via gravity, you can also predict the actions of people if you have enough information about their internal chemical processes.
Yeah, I would agree. And this kind of plays into the idea of recognizing the cycles. If you can recognize the patterns, then you can kind of determine what's going to happen.
Now, obviously, this is a hotly contested field of philosophical debate, but we
Yeah.
have an advantage. We're talking about the ontology of a fictional universe where our experiential perspectives are not limited to our singular meat sacks. We can have a greater perspective on causality in Warcraft than we ever could in real life. So back to that first question, but
So essentially, spontaneity is free will. Well, what's kind of scary about that concept is like, and I don't know if this is pseudoscience or if it's been disproved or whatever, but have you guys ever seen the videos where they hook people up to like electrodes and they tell them to press this button, but they gotta press it, like, I think the premise is they have to press it like before or without the lights, the diodes, like electrodes or whatever, diodes like lighting up. And what happens is the fucking things light up before the person even moves. So it's almost, it gives this impression that the decision, the subconscious decision, is already triggered before you act, which is like, what the fuck? Am I really making the decision, or is there something deeper in the layer of my subconscious that's choosing before I even consciously recognize it? That's pretty fucking crazy. Maybe I'll show you guys that if I can find it
ever
after
could in
this.
real life. So back to that first question, but refined. Does the Warcraft universe operate under a deterministic framework? Can free will even exist on Azeroth? And when we look at the way certain aspects of lore and world building are presented, we can see that the Warcraft setting is definitely deterministic. Free will is not the baseline. Many of these signs have played a consistent and important role since the earliest days of Warcraft's story, but the more recent ones have made it all the more important to talk about this facet of the story. The most overt indicator is the existence and functionality of prophecy and fate within the setting.
Huge thing.
The real-world definition of prophecy implies guesswork and uncertainty, but when we talk about it in a fictional setting, we tend to correctly understand a level of confidence granted through magical or otherwise supernatural means, where a character is given direct visions of the future or otherwise obtains information about future events. Not all of these prophecies end up coming true, and characters like Velen typically talk of seeing multiple future possibilities, but this functionality can be chalked up to a storytelling necessity. If a character is allowed to accurately predict far future events, then those events have likely already occurred from the perspective of the reader, or else they would just be spoilers for future story. Still, within the idea that future events can be predicted at all, especially as it involves sapient beings, there is an intrinsic concession that people's actions are, to some degree, predetermined by fundamental forces. This lines up with a philosophical idea called soft determinism, or compatibilism.
And he's probably going to give the examples of this, but this is like the inevitable fate of Nozdormu. It's like the destiny given to Illidan by the light. It's shit like that.
This is what you would probably call common sense for a layman's understanding of the free will debate. Yes, there are pre-existing conditions that you don't have
It's
control.
like Kilrog sacrificing his eye to see his death. It's like Elyson peering through the time waves to see that the Legion inevitably wins. But to me, I guess the concept in WoW is that somehow, some way, Azeroth may actually either be the grand, architect and orchestrator of all of this, or that she has somehow literally become some kind of conduit of free will in a universe that is otherwise very deterministic, in that that Azeroth is something maybe even like new that is kind of dismantling the pre-existing system, so to speak.
Over, but you as an individual possess the ability to self-determine a course of action at any given moment. On its own, this is not free will. That would require a creature being able to act without regard for any pre-existing circumstances.
Right.
So for some insight into the forces
Right,
that
because
drive...
what he's saying, again, to go back to what he said at the beginning, is that because of all of your experiences, memories, feelings, etc., the actions that you take, while not being necessarily like railroad deterministic, they're so influential upon your choices that you can pose the question, do you really have free will? This is a pretty good video. I like this so far.
The actions of people and creatures, let's talk about the 1,000 Years of War audio drama with its abundant mentions of fate.
Yeah.
If you haven't listened to it yourself, you should just go do that right now.
My man.
Not only is it foundational for Illyria's story in The War Within, but it's just a fantastic piece overall.
It's also really sad that the first part has 533k views. The second part has half of that at 213k. And the last part only has 190k. People just can't even devote 2 hours to listening to something. They lose interest after 36 minutes. Half the people watching lost interest. Like, it's so sad.
Over the course of the audio drama, as often as Zira talks about fate as an immutable force, she also says that the Burning Legion changed fate in some way or another. That should be contradictory. If fate can be changed, then people's actions aren't predetermined, right?
Right.
And if people's actions aren't predetermined, then where does the concept of fate come from to begin with? This seeming contradiction held back my theories on free will for a while, but the answer was right there the entire time. It's all just a matter of perspective.
The light seeks one path and shuns all others as lies. The shadow seeks every possible path and sees them all as truth. Neither viewpoint is true. Neither is wrong.
The notion that there is one path, one fate, or one outcome for the Legion, or anyone, to change is a construct built from Zira's limited perspective of the universe. The Shadow's perception of endless possibility is also a limited construct. Fate and predestination do exist, and events can
I love
be
how he's
predicted on
using
some
the
level.
single post and all of the the visual examples to make sense of it are really good.
Construct. Fate and predestination do exist, and events can be predicted on some level, but the models that the light and the void use are incomplete. Putting it in terms of causality, the light sees one cause and one effect, where the void sees many causes and many effects. Each one of them is missing something essential. We see this issue expanded on in Xal'atath
Correct, they're not
where
whole.
the one path versus 1,000 path views are expanded to more than just the light and void.
Vitae, umbra, tumult, improvisation, and possibility. Mortis, lumen, ordos, rhythm, and structure.
This attribution of philosophy is something intrinsic to each of the 6 powers, and remains in line with that little extra detail we got from that dimensional codex in The War Within. These viewpoints are not universal constants. They are aspects of the personality and outlook that inform the culture of each of the 6 powers in turn, but not their dimensional topology.
Correct.
For all intents and purposes, this concept of fate, which we can understand as a consequence of one path / 1,000 path viewpoints, is not the domain of any of the 6 powers. But there we have the determining factor, literally, magic. Magical creatures are infused with specific values and personality traits by whichever of the cosmic forces they are most aspected towards.
Yep. Especially those of the elementals. Anything elementally aligned has certain traits. I mean, that's one of the first things Chronicle tells you.
And that influence is what informs the forces of causality that make the future something that can be predicted. They are driven to act in a manner in line with the structure / possibility divide.
Yes, and as a result, they adhere to certain cyclical behaviors. Correct. But is it possible to break away from those?
Like a juiced up version of the enchanted water in the ruby life pools, pushing the dragon whelplings to act in a more ordered fashion. And that personality informs the manner in which they go about pursuing their power's dominance, generally split somewhere along a divide between creating and destroying. The idea of magic driving a creature's predetermined nature is consistent with pretty much any example you can think of, including the Shadowlands. Domination magic and the Jailer's Soul Forges alter the magical nature of souls and force them to operate within those new boundaries, creating the Mossworn. From our perspective, it's not so different from the process of light forging or becoming a demon hunter. This is reinforced by Anduin's perspective when under the Jailer's control. He talks about being fully lucid and in control of what he was doing, but being unable to make any other choice. But why does this war for dominance keep pointing the 6 powers towards trying to claim Azeroth? We'll get back to that. The original question at the start of this rant was about whether free will could even exist. And to be honest, I've mostly gone on about how it doesn't, which leaves some serious concerns for the story as a whole. Themes of predestination in highly narrative-driven games can be thought-provoking, but themes of predestination in games like RPGs, where player expression is one of the selling points, can create some friction with players who feel some agency is being taken away from them. Shadowlands is poorly received by and large for many good reasons, but it missed the mark with the sad lava slugs bit or whatever it was that was supposed to justify the jailer's crusade. Did they rob the players of all agency with strong-arm suggestions of prophecy and fate with how the jailer seemingly orchestrated every major event from Warcraft's history? Let's assume free will can even exist. What would that mean amidst all of this mess? How would you even be able to tell? So for a while, I thought we'd have to just disregard Shadowlands and all of that first one's business to find a comforting answer. But again...
And part of what ties into this is you have to consider, like, is the jailer sensing that something was wrong with the cosmos and wanting to unite the Shadowlands? Was that even his choice? Or was that something that he was always going to do? Right? Like, you start to get into like, was Zoval only controlled and predeterministic after domination, or were the actions that led to that sequence of events that led to his domination also predetermined? Like, it's a very interesting thing to consider.
Again, it's all a matter of perspective. Let's look through the story again, but from a different angle. First, we'll ask our old pal Algalon the Observer what he thinks.
Perhaps it is your imperfection, that which grants you free will, that allows you to persevere against all cosmically calculated odds.
So we've known that player characters / mortal heroes were special since Classic, what with our ability to come back from the dead. Never unique to the degree of the Warrior of Light or some other chosen one, but still, special. Back during Ulduar, the game's story felt less involved than it does now, and we wrote off Algalon's lines as just some funny-sounding fluff from a raid boss, in the same vein as your typical foolish mortal. I mean, we had no reason to think about it very deeply anyway, not to mention that philosophical analysis has never been common in Warcraft lore discussions. Plus, the story was just told differently back then. Blizzard probably had different ideas. Can we even be sure that Algalon's statement wasn't just fluff? Can we be sure he wasn't just talking about the curse of flesh? Well, maybe, maybe not. I like to say that true retcons in WoW have been few and far between, and that has held up through the years.
Agreed.
Ideas are generally adapted and expanded, but rarely contradicted.
Yep.
So here we have a thread saying that we can define...
People like to act like it's highly contradicting and that things are just removed or forgotten. That's not the case. That's not the case. They fail to recognize that many of the things that are portrayed to us in the game from the very beginning are perspective. They're limited perspectives in the first place. So anytime that something new gets added, people are like, oh, retcon. It's like, okay, no. Like, you realize that if you claim that every new addition to a story is a retcon, that stories never change, right? That, like, nothing will ever happen. You can't do that. You have to be able to accept that, like, there are going to be additive retcons, and in the case of World of Warcraft, there are significantly more additive retcons than subtractive retcons.
Predictions, some immutable aspect to our souls that implies we are not subject to the same rules of predeterminism as magical creatures.
Correct.
Is it free will? Maybe.
Maybe,
but if it's
yeah.
important, we'll
I like to
assume
think it is. I really like to think it is, and I like to think that it's because of Azeroth, but I'm really curious where he's going with
kind of
this.
consequence to it in the meantime, right?
The Legion's victory is inevitable. Every time stream shows it to be so. In all the possible futures I scried, I did not foresee one in which you were victorious.
This is
And this
different.
ties into things that, like, Raijalon and other Titan constructs might say where, you know, my master has shown me the future and you have no place in it, or your aberrations to be discarded. Like, if we look at what I perceive as the kind of Titans ordering of fate itself, if they themselves are not also bound to it, then you can start to realize that, like, we are an aberration in that we may very well have non-completely deterministic free will that does lead perhaps even to an inevitable endpoint, but still based on our decisions and whether or not it will be so. I guess inevitability doesn't really allow for whether or not it will be so. So that's kind of contradictory in what I just said. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, I guess from my perspective, I believe that we have the free will, but that we live in a structured, cosmic, fate-driven universe because of the Titans that, if executed how they hope it will be, or how Norganon or whomever hopes it will be, that free will be eradicated entirely. It is also possible that the Titans recognized in some way that they don't have free will. And maybe exposure to something like Azeroth, you know, I wonder if that could have almost even inspired them to want to bring about free will truly breaking free, or manifesting and infecting everything, so to speak. But there's different perspectives on how you want to look at that.
Right. Elisande isn't looking at fate like Velen or Zira or even a creature of the void. She's looking forward through time at all potential futures, and this,
much like one would anticipate Aman'Thul would,
is a distinction worth pointing out.
And she is doing it through the Nightwell, which is powered by the Eye of Aman'Thul.
Looking at fate like Velen or Zira or even a creature of the void. She's looking forward through time at all potential futures, and this is a distinction worth pointing out.
I want to also point out that Velen's vision is often misunderstood. Velen does not see one path, like Naru. That's not the case. Velen sees many paths. They're chaotic and almost maddening to look at, because there are just so many different variations of what can happen. Though, because of his trust and adherence to the Naru, at least up until the end of Legion, Velen followed where the light existed. So if you saw 50 different paths and you saw the beacon of light shining from one of them, that's the one Velen would pick. So he can see many possibilities, very similar to the Void, although he's generally regarded as arcane and kind of arcane aligned. This guy seems to be a direct fractal for Aman'Thul, if you ask me. Just saying. He even fucking looks like Aman'Thul. But that he does not randomly select them. He kind of follows where the light guides him to go.
This isn't a construct of fate. She was dealing in firm causality, which is something that the light and shadow can't really do. When you picture causality, cause and effect, the arrow between them is time, and it is a critical component. Cause turns into effect because of time. So when Elisande says, every time stream says the Legion wins, she's not saying, the Burning Legion changed the fate of the cosmos like Zera. It means she sees no causal chain of events that ends any other way. Predetermined magical creatures are slaves to causality.
Yes.
A metaphysical force like destiny or fate would account for the fact that they do have some agency, but the creature itself is categorically incapable of exceeding certain parameters of their own existence. So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Elisande is not incompetent. She didn't overlook the timeline where we won.
No.
That timeline did not exist until we created it.
Yes! Ah, fuck! I knew he was gonna fucking take it there. Yes. The timelines that are shown, the true timeline is the one that we make real. This is exactly what I said in my fucking video, where I said that the true timeline is not a predetermined thing that you can just chart and happens. No, it's only real when we make it real. That's the whole point. You can't look through time and see it. Ah, yes, he gets it. He gets it. It's only real when our actions make it real. That's how it becomes real. But how does Aman'Thul preserve this timeline? I don't know that he actually even does. But one thing that I will always remember is that in 1,000 Years of War, Illyria serves as a vessel for the connection of light and void. And when she does this, she doesn't see an infinite array of truths or one endpoint. She sees something happening in real time, right then and there, at a different point in the cosmos. And that was Turalian being assassinated by a fucking Eridar demon. But she could see it. So what this kind of shows you is that the light and void are blind to each other. But when they connect, they don't show you a far-off future or visions of the past. They show you what is real right now.
and the implications for our potential for creating new futures gets understandably downplayed. But this is exactly what you would look for to determine if free will exists. A situation with defined outcomes where a new, unpredicted possibility emerges because of the actions of individuals with free will.
It's the same thing that Illyria did. she learns in 1,000 Years of War that she could change the void. She could alter its perspective. Like, it has this predetermined vision of everything, right? All the different paths, but Illyria found out how to change what those paths are. She learned how to contort it and control it and make it so that it was not guiding her, she was guiding it. It's so fucking sick, dude. It's so cool. 1,000 Years of War is like the most important audio drama in the history of World of Warcraft. It's so good.
Unpredicted possibility emerges because of the actions of individuals with free will. While causality has been a useful frame of reference for explaining the spectrum of free will versus determinism, I am hesitant to continue using it to define Warcraft's universe at large, because it probably won't be the mechanism used to explain the function of free will within the setting.
I would agree.
This conveniently leaves room for this effect to be a narrative tool,
Yes.
which, good.
Yes.
Because, honestly, how are
And
you
where does it come from? It comes from Azeroth, dude. That's what I'm saying.
going to explain any of this to the average WoW player? Just telling someone your character has free will would net you a confused look at best and an eye roll at worst. Blizzard would need to have better phrasing that clearly communicates the weight free will carries in the story, probably with a slow drip of story quests explaining the concept piece by piece, with a decent gameplay reward to drive participation. Hey, wait a minute.
Thanks for letting me know, Kill.
Getting back on topic,
He said, hey, wait a minute. Wait, they're doing that.
My speculation about free will is based in broad philosophical concepts that don't necessarily apply to Warcraft, but I must admit I've withheld some information. So far, I focus on how we can come to these conclusions with existing lore, while knowing full well that this is all explicitly confirmed canon. Well, most of it. The causality stuff was a bit of conjecture. But
but it's pretty well supported by, like he said, the stuff in Zereth Mortis especially. And when you look at, again, other examples like Kilrog, like Illidan, again, like Elisand, and many others, like, I feel like what he's saying is pretty well, like, conceivable, even if not directly confirmed.
the stuff about mortals having free will and magical beings not having free will, that's what is absolutely canon.
Yes.
Whether you love or
Correct.
really more likely dislike Denuser, the man has been behind the curtain and probably didn't even create these ideas himself.
No.
He just happens to be the mouthpiece that we get confirmation from.
Correct.
The
I would
thing that
agree.
separates mortals from magical beings is free will. That's something unique to a mortal soul. That's
And just so you know, this is from Steve Denuser 2022. Chris Metzen said this at a BlizzCon panel in 2005. So, Steve Denuser is not the first one to say this. Chris Metzen said this. Chris Metzen literally said this 17 years ago. Sorry, 18 years ago. Sorry, 20 years ago. I can't do math. 20 fucking years ago.
what makes it distinct. And so while magical beings are kind of driven by the influence that they are a part of, to promote that influence, to propagate that influence...
It's been 84 years. What? I didn't know that? Yeah. Yeah, Chris Metzen said that magical beings don't have free will. That mortals are unique in this way.
to make that influence the most dominant force in the cosmos.
So Steve Denuser got a lot of hate because of kind of how they wrote Sylvanas and the way that all of this was portrayed in Shadowlands. But the truth is that Steve was mostly just reiterating things that Chris had already said. And that is correct. That is correct, Taganor. Xal'atath does not have free will either. She is one of the most bound by cosmic forces that I've ever seen. That's why she behaves in the nihilistic, ruinous way that she does. Yes, Zal does not have free will either.
to propagate that influence, to make that influence the most dominant force in the cosmos.
She is directly behaving as a result of what she is. What does that mean for the undead? Undead don't technically have the full scope of free will that we have either. Chronicle Volume 1 says that undead are driven by an insatiable hunger to destroy that which they can never have again, life. So, like, yes, pretty much anything directly touched by eternal determinism will affect you in this way.
And so while
Forsaken, I think, are a little different because I think their mortal soul, to some capacity, is still preserved, even though their body is decaying. So, like, I think there might be a gray area there where they have extremely strong wills, like Will of the Forsaken, for instance, but that they still, because of their undead curse, they are still affected in ways that maybe make them a little crazier or a little less empathetic or don't have compassion for living things.
magical beings are kind of driven by the influence that they are a part of, to promote that influence, to propagate that influence, to make that influence the most dominant force in the cosmos, it's mortals that have the free will to decide what their destiny is, what their fate is.
And that's why Illidan was able to... Well, he has an eternal demon soul now, but he is still originally mortal. So it could be a little different when a mortal being takes on additional magical properties. The more that they take on and the more that encapsulates their soul, perhaps the less free will they have. So you might be able to go from having, like with Anduin, a lot of free will to effectively none. But I think that magical beings that always were magical... Like, for instance, you have to wonder, because I've also posed the idea that maybe the Titans weren't always lacking free will, that maybe at one point they had it or didn't have it, were infected with it, and then tried to get rid of it because they perceived it as like a flaw or something. You know, their highly emotional states make me think that in some regard, like Arcadis, that maybe they too were affected by this. Someone like Sargeras is, I believe, has a lot more free will than the Titans, and that's also why he's like fleshy, even if it's demonic flesh, fleshy. And so I wonder, like, is it possible for even eternal magical beings to develop or kind of get infected with free will? And I'm quite certain that they can. So yeah.
I am inclined to put stock in how Danuzer explains this, because we are able to see the shades of how he describes free will again and again.
And because Chris Metzen said it 20 years ago.
As the themes of fate and choice become more prominent as the story moves forward. But this quote is still important on its own, because it gives us the closest thing we have to an in-universe explanation. Mortals have free will, and free will gives someone the unique ability to decide their own destiny.
Correct.
By extension, we can also see why prophecies of doom and darkness are constantly defied. It's almost obvious in hindsight. While free will and
they actually like indicate this, I think, even with the N'Zoth fight. N'Zoth wants our flesh, because N'Zoth seems to believe that if he can have our flesh, which is clearly different from the old gods, their purple and weird infected void corrupted flesh, that his Black Empire can be reborn. He wants to use us in order to fulfill the thing. It's like the Lich King. I baited you. I made you do the things. Every test, every battle, N'Zoth literally says the same thing, right? It's kind of the same thing to a degree with the Jailer. Like, I will string you along so that I can inevitably try to use you to do the thing that I want to do. It's been the basis of my argument for years as well, that this is what the Titans are doing. That they can't flat out control us, and they seemingly can't eradicate us. And so whether or not their goal is good or bad, the way that they must accomplish it, like all the other eternal forces, is by convincing us or misleading us into doing what they want us to. They can't force it to happen. So they have to make us believe in the outcome to push for the thing that they want to happen. All of the predeterministic eternal forces always, and this is proven to be true throughout the history of WoW, through the orcs, through the humans, etc., and so on, they have to utilize mortals to get shit done, because we are the ones that have the actual power to make it happen.
Destiny making is so natural to us, it's easy to forget that the rest of the cosmos doesn't necessarily follow the same rules. Our ability to defy expectations is not totally automatic, but it's completely antithetical to how the cosmic powers expect reality to operate before they encounter us.
This video is so fucking
Still,
good.
it prompts more questions than it answers. Where does free will come from? Is it intrinsic to a mortal soul, or is it an external gift? Going back to the Arcadis log, it seems Azeroth could be the source of our free will.
Yep.
Is it our connection with her, which identified us as Maw-walkers, that gives us free will? But if that's the case, what does that say about Jaina, Anduin, and Thrall, who could not activate the Waystones? Are they like the Earthen who were crystallized but did not become Thragar, touched but not blessed by Azeroth? It seems most likely that there is a connection there, and that it is not.
And this is where I personally like to bring in the hyper meta concept that even the champion, like not us, but the hero characters in the game are part of the structure, and that we as the real human being players are the only ones who can actually affect it. This is not something that I would argue in this for the sake of like a lore video, but the idea that we are the ones outside the cycle. We are the ones not in the matrix. We are the ones not in the disc. So we have the power to change it. Even the other very important characters, which all existed in the other timelines, remember? You had Gilvanis and Anduin, whatever he was called, Finduin or whatever the fuck. You had Gillidan Stormrage, whatever the fuck they were called, right? They still all existed. They were all still there. But exactly, Urim, we are accessing the disc from the outside. So it's so crazy, because in this way, they could do like a fourth wall breaking kind of thing where like we are the external force of free will. We are the thing that are affecting this heavily curated, predeterministic, fate-bound system. And it kind of bridges that gap between the character and us, and kind of shows that like it's an allegory for like our free will affecting the system and kind of bringing something new to it in this way. So yeah, so it's very Tron-esque. Yeah. And I think about it, like we've seen multiple times that you can store living creatures inside of discs. Norganon carries around a disc. Like the idea that like this whole thing is hidden within this matrix with rings and layers, and it sounds like data, like a disc, like a three-dimensional data disc that like we are accessing and going into in this manner. So it's super meta, it's fourth wall breaking for sure, but it's also, I think, pretty fun that like the high concept that World of Warcraft and the things in it are actually like a game or a virtual space or memories of something, like KT is saying. So yeah, I think it would be just interesting. We get to the Coreway and Azeroth is just Metzin. It's just shaking our hand. Congratulations, you did it. But it's meant to show you that like, even though it's a metaphor for real life, where like we are sentient creatures who can even question our own free will. And I think it's meant to really at the deepest level, it's meant to inspire you to realize that you have ultimate control like over your life, and that there are things that happen to you that seem out of your control, but you can still choose how you react to it. And that like these oppressive eternal forces that might seem so grand, so as to be undefeatable, it's not true. That they all rely upon us as individuals to make their vision even come true. And so there's like a deeper meaning there that your fate, it's like what Illidan says, your destiny is your own, your fate is your own. And I think it's supposed to feed into the idea that like you really can achieve like fucking damn near anything if you put your mind to it, even though there are some other things out there that would try to stop you from doing it.
Not a stretch to say that the World Soul energy detected in Earthen player characters in their starting experience is present in all player characters.
Yep.
We can almost assume that this is the same mark of a link to a unique World Soul that indicates our characters as Maw-walkers. And this same World Soul energy is the origin of our free will and our ability to decide our own destiny.
Yeah, I forgot the Earthen opener was literally appearing in one of those primal stasis prisons in a gold ring. The blue,
of a link to a unique World Soul that
manifesting
indicates our
in it the Argus.
As Maw-walkers.
And then breaking out of it. I forgot about this.
Same World Soul energy is the origin of our free will and our ability to decide our own destiny.
Yep.
After all, when we look at Fareem's journals and substitute the anomalous idea of a seventh cosmic power with free will, things kind of start to click together. The nature of the six as predetermined forces points towards a force that contradicts their existence.
Yep.
This line of thought has given me the idea that the seventh power is potential. And this isn't just a play on Azeroth being described as a being of great potential. I don't think we need to
And
look
I
further.
don't think you'd have to stretch very far to say potential and creation go hand in hand. Creation, souls, free will, potential. Yeah, they're all connected. They're all connected.
Than the myriad ways Azerite could be utilized to see how Azeroth's power is the physical embodiment of raw, unrestrained possibility.
Yep.
But the storytelling elements at the core of these ideas resonates with the thematics of Warcraft's overarching plot over the years and provides a clear reason as to why every cosmic force seeks the Prime World Soul. While all of the forces are locked in perpetual conflict, balance and coexistence is a recurring theme within the story. Neither the Alliance or Horde can actually ever destroy each other. Truth lies at the intersection of light and void, and the feedback between the Shadowlands and the Emerald Dream. For predetermined beings, it looks like we can assume that part of their destiny, or nature, or programming, or whatever you want to call it, is to never actually win the cosmic war.
Correct.
And the one time we have
They
seen
can't win. Yes. Yeah. They can't fucking win. They can't win. And they think they can, but they can't. That's why I've said before, it's not us that should fear the Titans. They should fear us. Because they have no real power.
a magical creature come close to defying this, there was a contingency left behind by the shapers of the entire system to allow creatures who have the capability to decide their own fate to come in and, well, make their own fate.
But what is implied is that not all of the creators, that being the Titans, were in on that plot. It is heavily implied that certain keepers like Ra did not know about the Chamber of Heart and the Heart of Azeroth thing. So it is heavily implied that there are some among the Pantheon, at least one, who does not want it, who wanted this to win. But that there are others like Khaz'goroth, Eonar, Sargeras potentially, that wanted us to win, that did not want or cannot adhere to the concept of being fate-bound because of their very nature or what they were exposed to, that being Azeroth or Argus, but...
Which peels back to another layer of questions. Was the jailer even the threat the first ones left the Waygates for us to deal with? Did we even deal with him in the way they intended? Did they leave back doors to every cosmic plane for us to come in and set things straight? We don't have the answers right now, but we can read between the lines. What we have, the Mawwalker prophecy, is an interpretation of a translation relayed by biased creatures with quasi-religious beliefs, and was never meant to be understood like this.
Correct.
It's intentionally filtered to us through so many layers of belief, so many layers of perspective. And once again, that's just it. Perspective and the issues it creates is really one of the core pillars of Warcraft's storytelling. Horde, Alliance, Light, Void. It's what keeps the old moral quandaries about Tarajo and Theramore rattling along. It's why we've started to doubt the Titans' motives more and more in recent years. Fractal echoes and permutations of themes and events and a repeating pattern throughout all of Warcraft's story. So viewing one truth as one end of the spectrum and 1000 truths as its opposite is flawed. Both sides have multiple facets, but their differences in expression isn't the point. It's the truth at their intersection that really matters. Like how the conflict between the Alliance and Horde leads to exploring the ideology behind breaking a cycle of hatred. Thinking about these concepts left an
This guy watched Pyromancer. This guy, I love this video. This is a banger.
In the back of my mind, wondering about another intersection we've heard of. What was the intended nature of Xera's Child of Light and Shadow? The more I explored all of this,
To end the Age of
alongside the
Demons.
associations of 1 in 1000 truth views, it sounds like Xera wanted to create a being who held both viewpoints. Which just invites more questions. What would a mortal holding both viewpoints be capable of?
I don't think that's what Xera wanted to do necessarily. It really appeared that Xera was going to override him with one limited perspective. And that even though she recognizes that he is the alleged child of light and shadow, it wasn't going to be that way in the end. The prophecy must be fulfilled. And I think that what we understand as the result of a combined light and shadow could differ depending on the perspective. And I'm not so sure that 0 was after that. I don't think that's the case.
Does a true predetermined fate or destiny even exist? Or is it all just a veil hallucinated by those 2 or 6 or infinite number of limited viewpoints? Would holding both views grant a creature the ability to see fate, true fate, both past and present, and subsequently the future in its entirety? You know,
perhaps, but I'm a little disappointed that he doesn't talk about Illyria witnessing the thing with Turalyon, because that really ties directly into it. It shows her what is happening in real time.
this sounds a lot like the Kwisatz Haderach. Quick aside, have you seen those new Dune movies? You might not be totally aware of how influential Dune is on modern fiction. Most popular settings have clear inspiration, and many more have outright references, from Star Wars to Warhammer 40k to SpongeBob.
And by the way, the two-sun Tatooine shit
Most popular settings have clear
big Koresh vibes.
inspiration, and many more have outright references, from Star Wars to Warhammer 40k to SpongeBob. If there's a giant worm, it's probably a Dune reference. And it's not an exaggeration to say Warcraft would not exist without Dune. One of the very first RTS games, Dune 2, released in 1992, had mechanics that were noted as deeply influential on the development of another game released shortly after in November of 1994, Warcraft Orcs and Humans. So it's no surprise that there's so many references to Dune wrapped into WoW. Xal'atath is basically 50% Dune reference when you know what you're looking at. It's not unreasonable to look for the same level of similarities in Warcraft like Jedi in Star Wars or Void Shields in 40k. Every fictional setting is derivative, and that is a value-neutral observation. But because of the number of references, we can be certain that the core of the Warcraft franchise was inspired by Dune, at least on some level.
Yeah.
In particular, I'm looking at the concept of prescience within Dune, because that's what spawned this video's entire line of thought to begin with. In Dune, prescience is achieved through a mix of genetics and the use of a psychotropic drug called spice, enabling a human to look back along their genetic memory, which, when combined with extreme intellect and mental training, allows a person to make intuitive inferences about the causal chain of events.
Hence Norganon's foresight. And it is possible that the kind of spice that inspires this could be something like, I don't know, Azerite. But I digress.
For the most part, this power is fairly limited in scope. The all-female Bene Gesserit, for instance, can only access their maternal genetic memory, giving them an imperfect perception of future events. But their goal is to foster a bloodline that will eventually lead to a being called the Kwisatz Haderach, who would have access to both paternal and maternal genetic memory, and thus have a complete view of past, present, and future events. Paul Atreides becomes this being, and he does some stuff with these powers, but that's out of the scope of this video, and I don't want to spoil the third movie.
Thanks.
Needless to say, if it was transposed to Warcraft, it's some stuff that would make Xera blush. But I think we can equate the Kwisatz Haderach to the Child of Light and Shadows. At a glance, the Child of Light and Shadow follows the same concept of being a messianic figure who would combine two viewpoints for a greater whole.
Yeah?
So I think that Xera's impression of the child ending the Age of Demons is a convenient first step to get us on board, but she notably doesn't tell us what would come after that. My speculation goes in the direction of
True, she only tells us what would happen if we don't do it. That the Burning Crusade, that the Legion would initiate a new Burning Crusade, and with it the cosmos will tremble. That's a very interesting point. She doesn't actually tell us what the outcome of fulfilling the prophecy would be. Only what would happen if we don't.
each cosmic power wanting some permutation of the Child of Light and Shadow for themselves as an expression of their win condition, a pursuit of the truth at the intersection of possibilities. Illidan's rejection of the gift is not necessarily a total subversion of this, the same way I think that N'Zoth showing us that Rathian can take up the role of Deathwing means that we haven't completely avoided the Hour of Twilight. Prophecies can be fickle.
Well, there's also some big hints that, like, for instance, the Tyrande encounter has her in a black forest with a bunch of shade creatures that we can't attack without the light of Elune, and it says in her dungeon journal that she's trapped in perpetual midnight. Like, I feel like that might be a bit of a hint.
But this well of speculation is kind of dried up until we hear more about the Child of Light and Shadow. But, okay, free will is a background theme to the setting, and we know how it works. Mortals can choose their own destiny. What relevance does it have to the story beyond a few lines of fluffy boss dialogue? Well, the most immediate example to talk about is my favorite story moment in all of WoW, the End Time dungeon from Cataclysm.
With Murazan.
It's very easy to read too much into the setting here, and to see it all as some alternative dark future, except We're going back to Northrend soon at
The infinite and the bronze are literally a fractal for light and void. Like, yeah, the Murazond Nosdormu thing and Aman'Thul, whatever the dark variant is. Yeah, it's an intent to converge the multitude of fates and the direct timeline as one and try to perceive, like, what's the truth.
the apex of a war to avoid dark futures for the world. Meanwhile, the main players of the dungeon, Bane, Tyrande, Sylvanas, and Jaina, are all still alive. So of course we stopped Deos from turning Nosdormu into Murazond in the past. That was never his destiny.
Correct. That's never what was going to happen.
And speaking of which, Nosdormu outright says that this is the moment of his demise. He recognizes this as the moment he saw way back when he first became the aspect of time. And this is mechanically consistent with the idea—
wow, how did I not pick up on that? Oh, that's embarrassing that I didn't realize that. Nosdormu saying, the moment of my demise, he's right. He's literally vocally acknowledging that this is what he saw in the Murazond thing. I actually didn't fucking realize that that's what he was implying. So yeah, we're literally experiencing that moment, but what he did not foresee was us being there to stop it, right? So Nosdormu, again, like Elyson, predeterministic, sees the timeline, sees the way, but it's not real until it happens.
At first, it looks like a potential plot hole. Was that our timeline's Murazond? And if not, are there a near infinite number of alternative Murazonds capable of influencing our timeline? If so, where are they at? You would expect more interference if this was the main timeline that defines reality, like—
It's the same concept when people ask, like, why don't we just go to another timeline and get Azeroth, or go to another— why doesn't the Legion just win in another timeline? It's like, no, it's not quite how it works.
Yeah. You would expect more interference if this was the main timeline that defines reality, like we keep getting told, right? Was this a moment where the mortal heroes chose their destiny, and this was why Nosdormu saw it as the moment of his death in some weird free will feedback paradox?
Probably, but then you also have to ask the question, is Iridikron fucking smart enough that he understands this, and that there is an opportunity that he is so fucking smart that Murazond looked at this and went, I see, but by making this decision, they are also choosing a certain outcome. They're sealing their fate by doing this. Like, yes, they will save Nosdormu and prevent Murazond, but what does that mean for what I can do in order to manipulate it after the fact? Like, what does that kind of lock in, so to speak, that will allow him to make plays now too?
No, not necessarily. We can defy a pre-existing line of fate, but that doesn't mean that every foe we beat is one that wasn't meant to be defeated. Having the ability to defy fate also implies the opposite, the ability to basically put a rubber stamp of free will to uphold a certain chain of events. Speaking of free will and upholding timelines—
Timey-wimey stuff, yeah, gets pretty crazy, and yep, here's Iridikron.
Tell me, little one, have you ever questioned why the Titans preserve this timeline?
I think why is the wrong question to ask here in light of my speculation about the functionality of free will. Instead, I think we need to ask if the Titans are even the ones doing the preserving. Causality may not be a critical component in the functionality of free will, but it remains a fixed feature in any discussion about time. After all, the preservation of a timeline is just fancy speak for the preservation of a particular chain of causal events.
Right, and in this case, the particular chain of causal events that are the direct result of free will might not necessarily actually be something that the Titans are even preserving. But again, I think what needs to be considered is the possibility that the Titans too have actually been at least partially affected by this free will. And I think that, Aman'Thul's Hearthstone cards like Vision of Heroes, this could very well be a thing. Like, once again, all of the Titans don't have to be considered bad guys. Like I've kind of been hinting at for a while, really outright saying, I think from my perspective, there is one Titan who is clear and evidently the bad one. and the other ones are not him. And that would be Norganon.
On its own, Cosmic Order's dominion over time gives it a prime position to guide the events of the main timeway. Individual choices can create branches, but the Bronze Dragons and their Titan overlords have the ability to select for time streams within which certain choices are made.
There could also be a kind of a crossover here. If someone like Eonar has free will and like a complete soul, not broken into componentry, then it's possible that she has, through the oaths sworn to her by the other Titans, gleaned control over them and is utilizing her free will to use powers and command the other Titans who don't have free will in ways that could be beneficial or immensely detrimental to what is going on. But we need more clarification on the relationship between those like Norganon, Eonar, and Aman'Thul in order to better understand what is actually going on there.
Some sources tell us that the timeline can't be altered, but we know that to be false. If an alternative branch of time is extended, it holds the potential to overwrite what did happen. This is the entire threat of the infinite dragonflights meddling in the caverns of time. I mean, in Dawn of the Infinite, we see the entire course of Azeroth's history briefly but dramatically altered about halfway through the dungeon. But time magic and infinitely complex cosmic calculations don't mean that the Titans have the omnipotent ability to manipulate time.
True.
After all, they don't choose to act a certain way, or even choose a certain course of time, not the way we intuitively understand our own actions.
Unless, as has been pretty directly hinted at with those like Arcadis and Khaz'goroth, unless they, by being exposed to Azeroth, as is, again, one of the big themes of the War Within, gleaned free will. I think that it may be possible that eternal entities exposed to the energies of Azeroth can get free will.
The Titans and their minions, including the Bronze Dragons, are only treading the causal path of fate and destiny laid out for them by their intrinsic nature as beings of order. So, how does this interact with our ability to decide our own destiny? Well, we don't exist in a vacuum. Our decisions affect the world, people, and creatures around us. We can use Christmas lights as a metaphor. The Titans and the Bronze Dragons can put up the lights on the tree in whatever pattern or configuration they want, but we have access to the outlet and the light switch. We can put a stamp of true destiny on events in the timeline, creating a sort of canon event when we are put at the center of important moments. And as a consequence, once the Bronze Dragons got mortal heroes involved in their work, we became the primary engine for the enforcement of the true timeline, and by extension, the most important factor to manipulate.
Yep.
Every choice we make can create a lasting branch in time, or permanently deny a branch of possibility. Which is just a cruel twist of irony for Iridikron. He rages against the Titans and their schemes, but remains blind to the true enforcers right in front of him. Will we remain his enemy when we learn more about the Titans and their plans?
I doubt it.
Will he remain our enemy once he finds out we are literally blessed by the world he's defending? But that's all I've got.
Or
Let me know
were
what
we
you
ever really enemies in the first place?
think in the comments. I hope you found these ideas as interesting as I did, or at least entertaining enough to listen to. Take it easy, have a good week, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude, this is one of the best WoW theory videos ever made. I agree with 99% of what you said, and you focused on aspects that most people miss by miles. Please make more videos. Holy fucking shit, that was a good video, dude. What the fuck? What the fuck? 350 subs, by the way. Dude, what the fuck, dude? Holy shit, that was a good video.